Thanks for tuning in to another installment of Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that analyzes shows and celebrates women of television. Thousands of comedies, variety shows, and dramas have aired, yet the presence of strong women, both in front of and behind the camera, is often a story untold. Well, Advanced TV Herstory begs to differ. There's so much more, and it's worth telling and retelling. Sometimes shows offer great leadership lessons, or are so timeless in their writing that people say the series has aged well. We'll explore those shows further. We'll revisit moments in TV where women broke records, exceeded expectations, or put their careers on the line. Advanced TV Herstory will connect the treasures of the past to the great potential of today's TV and online platforms, and how it all plays a part in being a woman in America today. Tomorrow's success is rooted in understanding what has come before us. So gear up for a little storytelling and fun, sociology, fashion, economics, or strategy. It's all here in Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Hey! So a few months ago, we started a series that looks at TV shows that feature 4 strong women characters, the sitcoms and dramas. And perhaps you caught recaps of Sisters from the 90s or found out a little backstory of how Desperate Housewives came to earn so many awards. There are more than a dozen shows that use this formula. That's a lot of work ahead of us still, but I just got to say, it's simply fascinating. So in this installment of Advanced TV Herstory, we're going to go in depth with college professor Dr. Wendy Burns-Ardolino on the construction of the 4 women dynamic. Based on her new book, it's called TV Female Foursomes and Their Fans, which was published in the fall of 2015, we'll also look into the 90s sitcom Living Single. So, Dr. Wendy Burns-Ardolino addresses the TV show Living Single as well as a bunch of others in her book. It's all really cool, and it was a great opportunity for me to learn more about this level of theory. As one of very few shows that depicted African Americans in all the main roles, the TV show Living Single was an audience favorite for 5 seasons on Fox. The cast consisted of Queen Latifah as Khadijah, Kim Coles as Sinclair, Erica Alexander as Maxine, and Kim Fields, yes, Tootie, of Facts of Life fame, yes, another female foursome sitcom, as Regine. We'll discuss its aspirational and representational aspects for 20-something Americans of all colors in the mid-90s. And we'll look at how those 4 main characters constructed together aided the show's creator, a woman named Yvette Lee Bowser, to cast a relevant net for really good plots. So listeners, I just have to say this, you do make a difference. One of you sent a link about Advanced TV Herstory to Dr. Burns-Ardolino, who then contacted me by mail. We had a great visit by phone and recently recorded a more focused interview on Living Single and all about the 4-character framework, which is her book's focus. Dr. Wendy Burns-Ardolino is chair of the Liberal Studies Department at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. Her undergraduate degree is in politics and philosophy, her master's is in English, and her PhD in cultural studies. She teaches some excellent classes like American Society and Media, and another one called Human Traffic and Trafficking, and a few more. Prior to her publishing this latest work, TV Female Foursomes, Burns-Ardolino published this one. It's called Jiggle, Reshaping American Women. And that work explores the relationship between American women and their bodies as mediated by both traditional and contemporary foundation garments. So the professor and I agree on a lot, and we learned that we have a lot in common. However, we haven't discussed foundation wear. Well, partly because I really don't discuss foundation wear with anyone. Okay, so back to the book. About 4 main women characters, all strong on TV. I asked the professor how she developed the idea for her book.
Originally, I just thought, okay, well, there's this proliferation of these female foursome shows on television. How interesting. And then I started comparing and contrasting them in terms of age demographics, obviously race, especially focusing on like the cities that they were in. So there were so many things that were going on there, even though there were repeating types and tropes, which was also interesting. How are these people repeating, but yet they're so different at the same time? So there were a lot of complexities there. But I actually did have, when I pitched it to the publisher, they were like, well, so what's the big deal with 4? And it did make me, I was like, kind of, don't you see it? Can't you see it? And they were like, yeah, but you're going to have to give us something more than that. And so I really had to think about it. And I had already read some research that Linda Kaler, who was a psychologist, had written about the 4-sided mandala symbol in Jungian archetypes and the Golden Girls. And so it was real easy for me to say, okay, yes, that's what I'm trying to say, but I'm not a psychologist and I didn't have access to the Jungian mandala 4-sided symbol to be able to talk about it in that way, but that's a facet of it.
The book TV Female Foursomes really is a work that spans writing theory and construction, sociology, gender studies, and media, and more. It's rich. In explaining the relevance and significance and often brilliance of the 7 shows she profiled, Burns-Ardolino encountered others who are similarly fascinated by the use of the 4 strong women character construct in their storytelling.
Later on, I had read a lot of critiques by other journalists and also other media studies scholars. Crystal Brent Zook is one of the people who writes about Living Single, and she was the first scholar fan person that I read on Living Single. And she talks about Yvette Lee Bowser, who was the producer, director person for Living Single, and talks about Yvette actually saying that these 4 women represent the 4 sides of me. So there's 2 things going on for me at that point. I'm like, these 4 women represent 4 separate worldviews or 4 competing or distinctive worldviews, right? But at the same time, you could say they could represent 4 different sides of a single woman.
The professor scoured academic and popular journals for insight. She found terrific value and used fan commentary and observation, yes, the comments written on YouTube and network sites, fan sites, and social media, to take the temperature of how Living Single, as well as 6 other shows, resonated with the audience. Burns-Ardolino's research spans the half-hour sitcoms that we know and love, like The Golden Girls, Girlfriends, Designing Women, Sex and the City, Hot in Cleveland, and the very short-lived Kashmir Mafia.
And in terms of the fan data that I looked at, which was mostly fan-based message boards and fan forums, I really thought from reception theory study that is a research methodology in cultural studies, that this was the perfect venue, right? Because fans are online in these fan forums, in these chat rooms, just talking about the shows, just being who they are with the people that they know who are in there. Their identities are clear to each other, and there's no reason for them to obfuscate or keep things secret or whatever. And so they're just reacting to the shows and commenting on other people's comments and posts. And it was just so real to me that these fans love these shows and that they have all these takeaways from these shows, and that these shows are actually meaningful to them in their daily life.
We all know that fan sites are a place where people share more behind the veil of anonymity than they ever would in public. Burns-Ardolino asserts that fan sites and forums, quote, address a myriad of social, cultural, political, and economic concerns, including the representations of women, gender, performativity, sex roles, heteronormativity, abortion, miscarriage, menopause, breast cancer, single parenthood, interracial relationships, AIDS, the right to die, chronic fatigue syndrome, pornography, world hunger, obesity, depression, political participation, free speech, the role of women in the church, death and dying, and last but not least, female friendship, to name a few. End quote. In her research, Burns-Ardolino built on the work of others and broke out fan commentary, and conversations across 4 major themes. And so here's how they're broken down. Messages of praise, issue-focused discussion. The third area was long-term narratives. And finally, discussion board culture. So some of that internal policing that some people love to do once they have been made admins or like to rat you out to admins, I guess is how that goes. Anyway, so in monitoring conversations about shows long canceled but still in reruns, or that enjoy strong, loyal followings, the professor never participated or added commentary at any of these sites. She just viewed and took notes that generated both quantitative as well as qualitative data. Here's how Burns-Ardolino reflects the values seen across 3 sitcom standards. A fan commenter named FS draws upon her own knowledge of the shows Living Single, The Golden Girls, and Designing Women. And she spins her own theory. It's great. Here's how it goes, and this is the quote right from FS. Although thinking about it, Kim Field's show Living Single is very similar to Designing Women and The Golden Girls in its characters. Still quoting. The book-smart, business-minded one, Dorothy, on The Golden Girls. Julia on Designing Women, and Kadisha on Living Single. The sexy one, Suzanne on Designing Women, Blanche on The Golden Girls, and Regine on Living Single. The dim-witted one, Rose on Golden Girls, Charlene on Designing Women, Sinclair on Living Single. And then there was the more sarcastic or immature at times, that's in parentheses, one, Mary Jo on Designing Women, Sophia on The Golden Girls, and Maxine on Living Single. End quote. I took that quote from page 10 of Burns-Ardolino's introduction for 3 reasons. First, I give the professor a lot of credit for wading through hundreds of sites and cataloging millions of words of fan expression. The second reason for reciting that early quote from the book is that it reveals just how seriously and closely women viewers watch shows, both current and those in reruns. Sometimes that creates expectations that are almost impossible to fulfill. Expectations of the show's creators, the writers, how the plot will unfold. But it also has the power to build an incredibly loyal fan base that, when armed with social media, has really yet to make a mark. I think that that's still ahead of us. The third reason why that basic quote is a good example of how much some people think about TV shows is you, the listener of this podcast. Advanced TV Herstory attempts to gather first-hand perspective about women in and of TV. The professor and I share a great interest in TV herstory, and it was an important part of her growing up in Tennessee as well as my own childhood in Minnesota. So that got us to talking about the whole notion of what a scholar fan is.
In a way, I was one of them. You know, when I talk about being a scholar fan in the book, and that is a whole other field is like scholar fandom. You know, I didn't really know that I was a scholar fan until I read someone else's, in-depth analysis of that. And then I was like, yes, that's who I am. I'm a scholar fan. So in some ways, I identified precisely with these fans, right? Because this is my experience. These shows have meaning for me in these ways. But the book was an opportunity for me to look at what they had to say and see, how the shows stack up over time and what the cultural production of meaning is in the shows for the fans.
So she researches and writes. I research and get to use audio clips and produce a podcast. So one might conclude this makes me a scholar fan too, of sorts. Life is good. Okay, so before we look at the show Living Single and the place that it holds in TV herstory, I want to share a little bit more with you about the professor's book. She draws out the societal value of each show, that long list of topics that I mentioned earlier, and how the plots unfolded or were sustained over time, and how viewers received the show. And sometimes that was a reception that changed over the course of a show's airing. They successfully transformed stereotypes or weighed in on social issues, and Burns-Ardolino asserts, through the effective use of 4 strong main characters. And so here's a quote. For example, she says, The Golden Girls combats ageism through depictions of active female desire of women over the age of 50, while upward mobility and racism are addressed in virtually every episode of Living Single and Girlfriends. Female sexuality and heterosexist values are challenged by Sex and the City, and traditional Southern femininity and contemporary feminism collide in the plot lines of Designing Women. The ways in which these programs employed stereotypical female foursomes to confront and disrupt mainstream cultural ideologies, hierarchies, and power relations enables them to contribute to the growth and development of the third wave feminist movement. End quote. Oh, okay, relax. The whole book isn't that intellectual. There are meaty comparisons of the four in The Golden Girls to the four in Hot in Cleveland and to the four in Sex and the City, and so on. And so you know all these characters, you know them. But there are also really legitimate comparisons to make, and I'm glad that Burns-Ardolino has put this work out there. She too is thrilled that the book has been published, and from her research, she knows the kinds of readers or groups to which it should or might appeal.
The audience, I think, for this book is wide, because it could be anyone who is a fan of any of those individual shows who may or may not have been introduced to the other shows. It could be anybody who is a scholar of popular culture and wants to look at audience reception theory or fan-based message boards as a location for looking at cultural production of meanings. And then I also think anybody could use the book in like a media studies classroom or a women's studies classroom or even a cultural studies classroom. So it has, I hope it will have wide appeal. I've gotten really fabulous feedback from the people that have looked at it so far, and I think it's a great cover. So yeah, I think it turned out really good. I'm proud of it, and I'm really thankful to McFarlane for finding a home for it.
Now, I gotta tell you, I was thrilled that the professor wanted to talk about Living Single, which debuted on the Fox network in 1993. She's just enough younger than I am that it had a greater factor in her young adulthood than it did in mine. And so in 1993, which at that time Fox had a very different outlook on its place in the cable world than it does today, the reality is that in 2004 to 2012, Fox garnered the highest network ratings in the 18 to 49-year-old demographic. That started off stronger, actually, in the 1990s, but then really kind of changed course in the late 1990s. And in the 2000s, which isn't that long ago, yes, just a few years after Living Single aired, Fox was the home to more original series like The O.C., House, Bernie Mac, Malcolm in the Middle, and Arrested Development. But if you can picture those shows in your mind, you don't see quite as many African Americans or any diverse casting the way that it existed on Fox in the 90s. Fox started out as a fledgling cable channel in 1986 and grew its programming book bit by bit each year. In January 1993, which was the year Living Single premiered, Fox had extended its original primetime programming to cover each night of the week. That programming caught the eye of African American and Latino audiences, somewhat, some would say, put by bait, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. They saw faces and heard plot lines that were absent or forgotten on the major networks. So here's how the professor explains the formula of 4 strong women and how Living Single puts it to use.
The big reveal in my book, which is I blow it all in the first chapter, is, besides repeating typologies, is that these women act as foils for one another. Erica Alexander, who is Maxine Shaw on Living Single, ends up winning, I think, several Golden Globes for her acting on Living Single. I mean, she's an acclaimed actress because of that show. I mean, that show acted as a vehicle for her talent. So she is the feminist on the show, right? Even though we have this really strong, independent, working woman, Queen Latifah's character runs Flavor magazine. Her name is Khadijah James, and, you know, she's the self-proclaimed mother of the foursome, which is another, you know, typology. So in some ways, Maxine, you'd think, or Max as she's known in the show, would be a foil for Queen Latifah, and she is in a way, but it's like they hold the bookends of the show. And then Kim Fields is this femme fatale who's like, why do you want to do so much work when you can, you know, get a man and he can take care of you and you can have nice things and you can go downtown and shop with your girlfriends and go to boutiques and spas, and she wants the glamorous life. So we have that person, and then we have Sinclair, who plays the naif, right? The classic naif. I mean, some people refer to that character as the dumb blonde character too, and is in many ways the comic relief throughout the series. But it takes all four of them. You kind of need all that, because too much. I'm a feminist and I'm a kick-ass attorney, and, you know, I'm the maverick, because that's the other thing that she goes by, is the maverick. You know, she's like in it alone, and she's the one that doesn't live in the brownstone, because Kim Fields lives in the brownstone too. Kim Fields lives in the brownstone. Sinclair James lives in the brownstone. Khadijah lives in the brownstone, but Max doesn't. But Max is a mooch. So Max comes over and eats all their food and, like, uses their phone and watches their TV and hangs out with them. But then she goes back to her place and is this independent woman. But too much of that would be too much. Right? So you need these other people to balance it out. And I think that's the formula, right? That's why the foursome shows work.
Here's how the setup is explained another way. This one without all of the theory that the professor really was able to articulate in a way that almost anybody can understand and begin putting to use when you start thinking about other shows. In fact, Arsenio Hall, who was a significant African American on TV during the late 80s and throughout the 1990s, had invited the living single cast to his Fox talk show about the time that the show premiered.
Yes, are four established and very popular women in the world of entertainment. They have a new series called Living Single on the Fox network, and it's already being described as a girlfriend thing. I have a clip for you. Check this clip out.
It's him! Ladies, on the other side of that door stands Michelangelo's David, a.k.a. my Brad.
And on this side of the door stands a woman who could give a damn he fine. Oh, and good technique and big feet. Regine, aren't you going to introduce us?
Brad. Girlfriends, Brad. Night.
Brad Hamilton. Pleasure to meet you.
Oh, how do you do?
Yeah. The gentleman is a brother named Silk, and he was in White Man Can't Jump and a lot of other things. You've seen him before, but let's find out who these ladies are, starting at the end. Since you've never been here before, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Erica Alexander.
Hello.
Hey. Hi, I'm Kim Coles.
Hi, I'm Kim Fields.
And Queen Latifah in the house.
Before this fun foursome covers a few other topics, Arsenio asks them to describe a bit about their characters. Kim Fields and Kim Coles chime in. My memory of the Arsenio Hall show is that there was always laughter. It seemed like his guests felt at ease, that they had fun.
I'm hurt. No,
She is kind of like her character.
Regine is just real shallow and superficial, and I resent.
She's just like that. That's her.
It's a joke. She's
It's a
cool.
joke.
No, she's like 10% projects, 90% nouveau riche, and she just got into some money, but always wanted it, and now she thinks that she's just it. And her friends can just, be counted upon to slam her at every chance they get, to keep her level-headed.
Okay, Kim, now tell me about your character.
Okay, my character is Sinclair. By the way, I play Queen Latifah's cousin. Her name is Sinclair, and she's just full of life and full of joy and full of wonderment and just sees the world through rose-colored glasses. And if she were here right now, she'd say, oh, it's so good to be on the Arsenio Ham show. I mean, the Arsenio Corridor show. I mean, what is his name?
Okay, all right, she did it. Okay, so who owns... Okay, we going to tell them what you really did. She was making a bet today that she could come on the show and find a way to call you Arcilio Ham.
Because she always does behind my back anyway.
No, she was like, I'm going to do something today. I'm going to stand up. So like 4 people owe her $1. We owe her $1. You know, she a comedian.
In her research on living single, the professor quotes an articulate, well-written post by blogger LaToya Peterson, posted in April of 2008 about living single. Looking back on the show a decade after it aired, Peterson put great context into how a show about 4 professional, educated, middle-class single women captured a moment in time for her and her peers. Here's a quote from the blog, which is entitled Racialicious, which Burns-Ardolino quoted on page 38 of her book. Here's the quote. Their lifestyles looked decidedly normal, though I remember reading criticism somewhere that the kind of brownstone they had in New York would probably be out of reach. Watching the show as an adult reinforces to me that the 90s were a time of more realistic TV. Even within the ridiculous comedy setups, the dialogue is gifted in showing how people actually talk and relate to each other. End quote. Living Single is available on YouTube, and the first season has been released on DVD. It was a hit on an emerging network that made a 180-degree turn in its focus. Its audience was largely Gen X. Living Single represented primetime progress, along with The Cosby Show, A Different World, and a host of other sitcoms and dramas. Yet, because Living Single was one of only 2 shows of the female foursome construction, they hold more power for social disruption, as the professor points out. Feminists like LaToya Peterson and others in social media contribute in their own way to defining the show's significance and impact on teens and adults at the time. And at the time, the pickings for young women of color were pretty darn slim.
What I got out of the chat rooms, and this was real clear on the fan-based message boards and the chat rooms, was that people were so desperate to have positive representations of African American women that they absolutely took the good with the bad. And that actually does flow through to Girlfriends, where there was a lot of critique about this. This show is just about finding a man. This whole show is finding Mr. Goodbar or looking for the right man. That finding Mr. Right, I think, and the fight for Mr. Right is something that I write about in my book. But that flows through. And actually, Yvette Bowser said that that's what TV execs wanted her show to be. She pitched it with the title of My Girls, and it became Living Single because they wanted it to be like these 4 women are out looking for a man. And so she agreed to Living Single, but obviously the characters kept their independent working woman status.
Men as well as women, or maybe resaid, boys as well as girls, as it turns out, are loyal followers of Living Single. In 2014, Kim Fields was a guest on Sway's radio show, which is a very popular show broadcast on Sirius XM radio. Sway talks candidly about his memory of Living Single.
Thank you so much for having me. And all this love, my goodness, I'm like in tears. I sound a mess because thank you so much for all this love and respect, man.
Absolutely. Listen, there was a show that we all watched growing up in this hip hop era where our sister, Queen Latifah.
La, 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 la. Dana.
Dana hit that screen in ways that we even didn't know she had so much range.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I was looking at Drake on the ESPYs yesterday. Hosting the ESPYs, just did an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
I smiled watching Drake doing that the same way I smiled watching Dana doing Living Single. Before, I never got into what's the one, Sex in the City.
Right.
That was
your thing.
Living Single, that was before Sex in the City.
Yeah. 4 girls in Brooklyn.
And so when Sex in the City came, I thought, man, this is just Living Single. Because the camaraderie, the dynamics between 4 women, African-American women, professional women.
Yes.
Sophisticated women who also went through men problems and went through sister problems, and the way it was portrayed, but also the comedic timing on that show that you brought to me, because you were the veteran.
Yes.
Regine.
Yes.
Was amazing. Let's take a listen to this.
What are you doing?
Putting all the prospects I dated last year into 2 piles.
Guys who killed themselves and guys who ran screaming into the night.
Well, at least I can't separate my old dates into toothless and jobless.
Regime. Does Regime still exist?
Rumor has it, yes. Apparently, there are certain things that I say or do, and the way that I say and do them, that somebody will go. Like my makeup artist in L.A., I said something to her, and she was like, "Ooh, that was Regine."
Really?
So, yes.
That's a great clip, in part because there's such pride there. Through her acting and career that had been relatively free of incident or scandal, Kim Fields has been a part of people's lives for a long time. She's made people laugh. You get the sense that she's a good soul. On the DVD edition of Season 1, Kim Coles and creator Yvette Lee Bowser appear in a bonus feature and provide a little backstory about the show's creation, which that backstory underscores Burns-Ardolino's earlier statements about the show's focus on sisterhood and breaking out into the big world. There may have been other interviews on talk shows, but in a pre-internet world, no one thought to tape them for future uploading to something called YouTube.
I had a deal at a studio. Queen Latifah had a deal at a studio. They put the 2 of us together, and then the studio went out and found the right person to create this show around the 2 of us.
So I wasn't interested in doing something that was just kind of this wacky slapstick thing. I wanted to do something that was really a little more gritty, a little more edgy, a little more based in my personal reality. And I happened to have an idea for a show which was about kind of me and my friends and our adventures as young women trying to make sense of the big, cruel world.
Later today on Oprah, lonely women who waste their lives watching television.
The show became an ensemble very quickly. Never mind that it started with Queen Latifah and Kim Coles as the core.
An ensemble cast is a cast that really works together to create a humorous whole.
I think it was an ensemble cast in the truest sense.
All of the actors could carry a story, and all of the actors could deliver a home run with a joke.
Why does this keep happening to me? Because you keep looking for someone to carry you. Well, what's wrong with that?
They keep dropping your ass.
There's no question that Queen Latifah was the best-known member of the cast. Her career was on a huge upswing, having made a name for herself as an African-American woman rapper, the best-known one. Latifah's success and her role as the stable matriarch Khadijah is mentioned in a book that Burns-Ardolino used in her research. That book is called Color by Fox, the Fox Network, and the Revolution in Black Television, and it's written by Crystal Brent Zook. Zook's 1999 book observes, quote, "In looking at Latifah's various on-screen roles, then, we see that her feminist and lesbian characterizations represent an integral part of her persona as a popular icon among African-American audiences. Moreover, because she is situated within a community of hip-hop artists, a whole body of narrative possibilities is to her characterizations, possibilities that both challenge patriarchal contexts and affirm traditional notions of mythical, matriarchal Africanity with a contemporary womanist twist." Okay, parenthetically, I'll just say that there are words in that sentence that I've never said before, so my apologies if I said something wrong. Wow. So, I guess I have to wonder, because I've never wondered this before, is Queen Latifah a transformational figure who stands to have a long, high-profile career? It's worth thinking about, because it seems quite likely. She's weathered quite a bit. But it's just a shame that she hasn't worn that 5-year span of her life a little bit more as a badge of honor than she has. That was a great show, and and the internet offers almost no connection where she is talking at any length about the importance of that show, either to the community or to her in her career, or the relationships that she created with her 3 co-stars. Since Living Single's last episode, Kim Fields has acted some and directed occasionally. Kim Coles has appeared in TV shows and has directed and written. And Erica Alexander has a long list of series that she's had either a recurring or single performance in. It's interesting to put Living Single into the context of the times, the early 90s, and compare them with today. Audience behaviors are changing as more households pull the plug on cable. We are becoming all the more customized and selective in what we watch. But there's a spike in shows recently with increasingly diverse casts. Just last year, skeptics weighed in with the question of whether this is a permanent development or a spike. It was noted that, quote, upstart networks like Fox and the WB, back in the day, went hard after diverse audiences with shows like Living Single and Martin and Moesha and the Jamie Foxx Show. Remember all those? And then a network merger between UPN and the WB in the late 90s revealed the audience segregation made better social sense than it did business sense. And the surviving network's format morphed toward integration and with an increasing focus on reality shows. And Fox, in its own corner, shifted its focus to young men. Knowing the business side of television networks is important to the degree that we understand precisely the opportunity that Yvette Lee Bowser refers to when she says she was asked to develop a show. It was cast with grade A talent, the writing was solid, and it resonated with audience for 5 seasons. Had the sand not shifted under her feet and the show's feet, the show might have gone on to further seasons, or it could have spun off to develop a whole new set of characters. Instead, it's kept alive in memories and textbooks as a time in American and TV herstory when a show gave voice to realistic aspiration and representation of young African American women. Geez, I really didn't intend to end this show on a downer, so here are a few takeaways from the interview with the professor and from what I've learned about Living Single, the show. 1, we are of like mind. That would be you, me, and Wendy Burns-Ardolino. There's a blend of optimism for the future, but also a recognition that there's more work to be done understanding the lessons of old shows and the challenges and struggles that veteran directors, showrunners, and writers endured to produce quality television. 2, it pays to forward a link of this show to someone you know. Before I started this podcast, I never would have had the occasion to know the professor. Now we're practically buds so much that she's all but invited me to flop on her couch the next time I'm in Michigan. Seriously, though, connections are powerful. Women who get that do better, particularly when they are so united in their focus and goals. 3, it's rewarding to know that you're a participant on a fan site or message board, that your commentary might be considered data by somebody conducting research. How cool is that? 4th and lastly, we need to remember that just as in TV female foursomes, when we surround ourselves with others who have different strengths, we all grow and are better positioned for success. It's certainly more interesting, and we also have learned that no single person, real or made up, is exclusively one type. We each hold a little hint of the naif, shades of matriarch, or maybe aspire to be a little bit more femme fatale. Thanks for listening to this installment of Advanced TV Herstory. I am pleased to have had the chance to introduce you to the very thoughtful Professor Wendy Burns-Ardolino, Ph.D. Her book is described and available for purchase at mcfarlandbooks.com. That's McFarland books, BOOKS.com. Because her book documents a wide range of data-gathering sources and techniques, she presents yet more resources for someone who has an interest in media, representations, feminism, all of it. And Wendy is happy to have you contact her directly.
I mean, it's fine with me if people email me. I'm Burns-Ardolino, Burns, ARW @gvsu.edu. But I'm also on Twitter.
While there are no direct audio clips from Living Single in this installment, know that the first season is available on DVD, and most of the seasons can be found on YouTube. YouTube was also the source for the Arsenio Hall show clips with the cast and someone's upload of the DVD bonus feature. If you've got an idea or theory or moment in TV herstory that needs a thorough scrubbing, send it along. Our email is advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter through our handle, TV Herstory, and know that feedback is a good thing. So please leave comments at the host site, Libsyn, Libsyn, or at iTunes, however it is that you came up onto this podcast. Or maybe somebody just forwarded you a link. Scripts for this and past episodes are housed at CynthiaBemisAbrams.com, which is also where you can go to find more information about my public speaking. I've presented a host of topics to rooms up to 100 people and eschew the concept of reading from a PowerPoint. You won't be disappointed. It's been my pleasure to be your host. I'm Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Thanks for listening.